The morning after the petition was granted, Joran Halling washed his hands twice, and laid the box on the workbench between the bellows and the unfinished pauldron, and he understood that the work of 22 years was finally about to leave his shop. He was 64. The fire was banked since midnight, the iron taste of cold metal on the air. The box was oak, plain, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Inside it were 5 things: a folded sheet of the inner stair sentinel's duty ledger from a winter 22 years gone, a clay die-cast that had stamped the wax of an officer who no longer wore the seal he had worn then, a copper ring with 3 notches, the bone handle of a boy's eating knife, and a letter in a young man's careful hand, written 2 nights before he died. The audience was set for the second bell after noon. Joran had petitioned, humbly, for a quarter hour of the king's time as the king's master armorer of Arlwen, a post he had held in silence through 3 campaigns at the salt border, 4 winters of plague, the late queen's funeral, and the present king's coronation. The petition had returned sealed. Granted, he closed the box. The hammer hung on its peg. The pauldron waited. 22 years before, he had stood in a different courtyard. The trial had been held in the lower forecourt because the case was, the Chancellor said, a small one. Joran had been 42. His son Timon had been 19 years, a junior sentinel of the inner stair, the lowest rung of the royal guard, an earnest boy with his mother's quiet eyes who had wanted nothing but the red sash and the king's watch. The herald had read the charge in the cold air. Timon Halling, accused of carrying a forged note to a foreign agent in the river district on the night the lion seal had gone missing from the late king's writing chamber. The seal had been recovered. The agent had not. A second sentinel, Rastin Cresswald, then 28, an ambitious junior officer, had sworn under oath that he had seen Timon on the inner stair at the hour of the theft. When the duty ledger placed the boy 2 flights below, Joran had stood at the rail of the public gallery, his wife pressed beside him so small he could feel the bird shake of her shoulder through his coat. He had watched Timon not speak when given the chance, because Timon Halling had been a guardsman 3 years, and he had learned the rule: a sentinel did not protest in a courtroom already decided. The boy had looked once at Cresswald across the cold air, and Cresswald had looked away. The verdict had taken 11 minutes. The rope had taken less. The true duty ledger, in the sub-archivist's hand, had been buried in a clerical box no one bothered to open. Joran had found it 9 months later, clearing a dead clerk's quarters for the widow. It placed Timon 2 flights below the writing chamber, at the hour Cresswald swore he was above. It was signed by the same clerk, and witnessed by the dead sentinel of the upper landing, whose body had been burned with the autumn fever before any second testimony could be taken. The clay die-cast Joran had found 6 years after that in the foundry of a foreign-trained smith, who had cast for a young Rastin Cresswald a duplicate of the inner stair officer's seal 3 weeks before the theft. The copper ring with 3 notches had been the dead sentinel's signet lost in inventory, sold at a fair, and bought by Joran, for a single coin, from a tinker's daughter 12 years ago. The proof had taken 22 years to make whole. By then Rastin Cresswald had risen first to captain of the household guard, then to comptroller, then, 4 years ago, to Lord Chancellor of the realm. He sat now at the king's right hand. The king was a young man, 31 years old. He had been 9 when Timon Halling was hanged. He did not know his master armorer's grief, only the iron the man had forged for him. Joran Halling had carried the box into the palace through the workman's gate. He carried it now, at the second bell, through the polished corridor toward the audience chamber. The royal guard of Aralwyn stood at the doors in 2 perfect lines. Red wool tunic, brass buttons polished to a king's measure, white gloves, tall black wool cap with the chin strap below the lip. Rifles at the shoulder, eyes forward. Joran knew each rifle he had, stamped his maker's mark below every breech. He had taught 2 captains of the household guard the proper care of the steel, and one of them, Captain Halvers, 50 now, a broad-shouldered, quiet man who had been the late queen's favorite junior, saw the old armorer come down the corridor with a small oak box, and stepped, for half a second, out of the line. "Master Halling," Halvor said softly, "you are quite sure." "I am quite sure, Captain. He sits at the king's right hand." "He has sat at many right hands," Joran said. "He sits there today." Halvor studied him. Something passed between them that did not require a word, the recognition of a long, patient thing finally arriving at its hour. The captain stepped back into the line. The doors opened. The audience chamber was a long room of dark wood and pale wool. The king sat on a throne of plain oak banded with iron. The late king had refused gilding, and the present king had not changed the chair. The Lord Chancellor stood at his right in the long blue coat of his office. The captain of the royal guard stood at his left, hand on the pommel of the dress sword. 2 more guardsmen flanked the throne. A clerk waited at the side table. The air was cold and still. Joran Halling crossed the long carpet. He did not look at Rastin Cresswald yet. He looked at the king. "You are Joran Halling, Master Armorer of Aralwen?" "I am, Majesty." "You petitioned for audience on a matter of justice. You have 1/4 hour. Speak plainly." Joran set the oak box on the small table the clerk produced. He laid his hands on the lid. They were old hands. They had hammered iron for 50 years. They did not shake. 22 years ago this winter, a junior sentinel of the inner stair named Timon Halling was hanged in the lower forecourt for the theft of the lion seal from your late father's writing chamber. He was my son. He was 19 years old. He did not do it. The king's face did not change. He had been raised to a still face. The Lord Chancellor to his right did not move either, but Joran Halling, who had spent a long life reading the small flickers in the men he made armor for, saw the half blink behind the Chancellor's eyes. 22 years was a long time, long enough for the man to have stopped expecting it. "Continue," the king said. "I have brought 5 things. With your leave, I will show them in the order they were found." "Show them." Joran lifted the lid. He set the folded ledger on the table first and explained it, the subarchivist's hand, the witness signature of the dead sentinel, the times in the right margin. His son placed 2 flights below the writing chamber at the hour of the theft. The clerk came forward at the king's small gesture. The clerk's face did not change, but his fingers were careful. He set the clay die cast next, and named the foreign-trained smith and the date of casting, and laid beside it 2 wax impressions, one from a household document 23 years old, one taken last winter from a discarded warrant in the Chancellor's outer office. The impressions matched the die. The die was 3 weeks older than the theft. He set the copper ring with 3 notches next, and named the dead sentinel, and the lost inventory, and the tinker's daughter, and the single coin. Beside it he laid a sketch of the ring on the dead sentinel's hand from a watchpost portrait that still hung in the south barracks. He set the bone handle of his son's eating knife on the table. He did not explain that one. He set the letter down last. He did not open it. "Read these in your own time, Majesty," Joran said quietly. "The letter is from my son, in his own hand, written the night before he was hanged. He named the man who framed him. He named the foundry. He named the dead sentinel, whose ring is now on this table. The names match. The paper matches. The ledger matches. The die matches. I have not invented a single line of it." The king looked at the table. He did not look at his chancellor. Joran Halling did not look at the chancellor either, although by now he could feel the man like a held breath at the king's right hand. "Master Halling," the king said, "you understand what you are asking." "I am not asking yet, Majesty. I am only setting it down." "Set it down, then." Joran lifted his hand from the lid of the box. He took 1 step back from the table. He looked, for the first time, at Rastin Cresswald. The Lord Chancellor was 50 that winter. His hair had gone white in the last 4 years. He was a tall, thin, well-tailored man with the mannered grief about the mouth that successful men wear in late middle age. He had not been a young officer at the rail for a long time, but he looked, for the half-second their eyes met, exactly as he had looked across the cold air of the lower forecourt 22 years ago, and this time he did not look away. He had nowhere to look. "My Lord Chancellor," the king said, "have you anything to say?" The Chancellor opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. The clerk had finished with the ledger and was working through the wax impressions with quiet, careful fingers, and the silence in the audience chamber had a shape, the shape of a long, patient thing that had finally arrived. "Majesty," Cresswald said. His voice did not carry the office it had been built for. I was a young man. I was 28 years old. I owed money. The seal was returned. The boy was my son," Joran Halling said. He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way a master armorer sets a finished blade down on a felt cloth. The Chancellor stopped speaking. The captain of the royal guard at the king's left had not moved. The 2 flanking guardsmen had not moved. But the air in the long room had moved, the way the air in a smithy moves when a great piece of work comes off the anvil and the apprentices, without being told, "Take 1 breath together." The king leaned forward. "Master Halling," he said, 22 years. The proof you have laid on this table is sufficient. You will have my Chancellor's office tomorrow at first light to give a fuller statement under the seal. Tonight my captain of the guard will hold the Lord Chancellor in the South Chamber under writ. The matter will be tried, in open court, before the autumn ends. I give you my word as the king of Aralwyn on that." The king paused. He held the old armorer's eyes. "And the rope, Master Halling, is mine to set or to stay. You have asked an audience. You may ask the second thing." Joran stood at the small table with his son's knife in front of him, and the man who had killed his son 3 paces to his right. He had carried in his coat for 22 years the picture of this moment, Cresswald in irons, Cresswald at the rope, Cresswald's wife at the gallery the way Joran's own wife had been at the gallery, the same bird shake of the shoulders. He had built that picture beside the anvil for a long time. He had polished it the way he polished steel. He looked at Rastin Cresswald. The man had aged. The hands were the hands of an old man now, not a junior officer's. The mannered grief about the mouth was, perhaps, real. Or perhaps it was not. Joran Halling could not say. He was not a magistrate. He was not the king. He thought of his wife. She had not lived to see this morning. She had died 12 years after Timon, of a small fever the physician had said had nothing to do with grief, and Joran had known the physician was wrong. He thought of the empty chair pushed back from the kitchen table that she had not let anyone sit in for the rest of her life. He thought of the unopened letter, and of its last line, which he had read alone every winter for 22 years. The last line of the letter was, "Father, if they will not hear me, do not let it harden you. Do not give the man my hate. Live longer than he does. That is enough." Joran Halling lifted his head. "Majesty," he said, "I have brought the proof and laid it down. The trial belongs to the law. I do not ask for the rope. I ask instead that the law take from him every office, every coin, every house, and return them to the families of the honest men he buried after my son. I ask that the verdict on Timon Halling be set aside in open court before autumn ends and his name read clean in the South Barracks where he served. And I ask that the Lord Chancellor live the rest of his life, knowing he was unmade by an old armorer's quiet bookkeeping." The room did not breathe. "I do not ask for his death," Joran said. "I have spent 22 years not asking for it. With your leave, I would like to stop carrying it. My son asked me not to give a man his hate. I am 64, Majesty. I have a forge to bank, an apprentice to teach, my wife's grave to tend in the spring. The law may have him. I will not." The king of Aralwyn sat very still on the plain oak throne. He looked at the small table and the 5 things on it, and at the man in the long blue coat at his right. Then he looked at his master armorer, 64 years old, who had stood his post in iron and silence for 43 years, and was this morning asking him to take a weight off. "Captain," the king said quietly, "take the Lord Chancellor." The captain of the royal guard moved. 2 guardsmen moved with him. Rastin Cresswald did not resist. He did not look at Joran Halling again. The long blue coat went out the side door under the careful hands of the royal guard, and the door closed, and the room was, for one long-held moment, only the king and the clerk, and the master armorer, and the open oak box. "Master Halling," the king said, "I will keep my word. The trial will sit before autumn ends. Your son's verdict will be read clean. The chancellor will be unmade in open court, and the estates returned to the families. And when the trial is done, I would like to come to your shop. I would like to see the place where a man can hold a thing for 22 years without letting it become a knife in his hand. I do not think I have been taught that." Joran Halling bowed. His back was old and stiff, and the bow was a small one, but he made it the way a master armorer makes, a thing with care, and without flourish. "You will be welcome at the forge, Majesty," he said. "I will bank the fire fresh for the visit." He closed the oak box. He did not take it back. He left it on the small table for the clerk, the bone handle, the copper ring, the folded ledger, the die cast, the unopened letter. He had carried them for 22 years, and he had carried them well. They were not his to carry any longer. He walked back down the long carpet. Captain Halvers, at the doors, said nothing as he passed. The captain only made, with his white-gloved right hand, the smallest courteous salute the one a captain made to a man who had taught him the care of his steel. Joran returned it the way his own father had taught him. The brief inclination of the head no more. The workman's nod, that meant "I see you, and I am still at my post." He walked out through the corridor, and the workman's gate, and the long lane to his shop. He took down the hammer. He lit the fire fresh. The pauldron waited on the bench. He set to work on it. The bell rang the 3rd hour over the city, and in a small shop near the river the master armorer bent his head to honest iron, and the long careful wait of 22 years went, at last, off his shoulders, and the work he had banked through, a whole life of grief, began, very quietly, to be only the work